This is Brendan Tedstone, Select Board Chair. Permit me to confirm all members of President can hear me. When I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Bob, are we live? Bob and HCAM? I can't. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Irfan Nasrullah?
Here.
Brian Herr? Mary Jo Lafreniere?
Here.
Amy Ritterbush?
Here.
Tedstone here. This open meeting of the Hopkins Select Board is being conducted remotely, consistent with the Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, we're complying with the executive order that suspends requirement of open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. All members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The executive order, which you can find the agenda materials for this meeting, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely as long as the public body makes provisions through adequate alternative means to ensure interested members of the public are provided reasonable deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. For this meeting, the Select Board is convening by video conference via Zoom webinar as posted on the town's web meeting calendar and the board's agenda identifying how the public may join. Additionally, the meeting may be also broadcast by HCAM through one of its many channels or platforms. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that some of the attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that others may be able to see you. Take care not to screen share your computer. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. We're now turning to the first item on the agenda. Before we do so, permit me to cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct of our business and to ensure accurate meeting minutes. Sorry. I will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, the chair will invite board members to provide comment, questions, or motions. Please hold until your name's called. Further, please remember to mute your phone or computer when you're not speaking. Please remember to speak clearly and in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. For any response, please wait until the chair yields the floor to you and state your name before speaking. If members wish to engage in dialogue with other members, please do so through the chair. So, not every agenda item will feature public comment. For the public forum, the portions of the chair will work with the meeting regiment by identifying their name and address. Each speaker will have up to 2 minutes for their comments. Please use the raise hand feature of the Zoom now to indicate you'd like to make a comment. Finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by roll call vote. Pledge of Allegiance. Let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Let's see. Public forum. Is there any member of the public who wishes to speak? Please use, actually, they should have already used the raise hand section. I see none, so we are moving on from public comment. Consent agenda. The board will consider approving the consent agenda consisting of the approval of the minutes of the select board meetings on March 2 and 3. I'm assuming that is 2021. Accepting a $20 donation to the Canine gift account from Doris Carver and accepting the resignation of Ramya Kamaraswamy from the Capital Improvements Committee. Board members, would you like to break out any items for a separate vote?
I just wanted to ask, how much was that donation to the Canine gift account?
$20 from Doris.
Okay.
Canine. Yep. I will request a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Anyone want to second that? Okay. Any further discussion? Hearing none. How do you vote, Mr.
Per, yes.
Ms. Lafreniere,
Grenier, yes.
Ritterbush,
Ritterbush, yes.
Stone, yes. Board committee and appointments. The board will consider appointing Patricia Shrodawa of the to the Council of Aging. Board members, any questions for Ms. Shrodawa? Mr. Nasrullah?
I have no
No.
questions.
Her?
No, thank you.
Ms. Lafreniere?
Well, I know Patricia from working at the senior center. She is very well thought of there and very methodical and a lovely person. And I think she will be a great addition if we put her on the Council of Aging.
Great, thank you. Ms. Ritterbush?
No, I read the application, no questions.
Good, and I feel the same way that Ms. Lafreniere does. Patricia, I'm sorry if I butchered your last name, but thank you very much for stepping up and offering to volunteer and to help us out on the Council on Aging. So I will entertain a motion to appoint Patricia Swardawa. Is that how you pronounce your last name, Patricia?
That's very close. Thank you.
Okay, to the Council of Aging to a term expiring 6/30 of 21.
So moved.
Second,
Any further discussion? Hearing none. Mr. Nasrullah, how do you vote?
Nasrullah, yes.
Mr. Herr?
Per, yes.
Ms. Lafreniere?
Yes,
Ms. Ritterbush?
yes.
Goodstone, yes. Welcome aboard, Patricia.
Thank
Thank you
you.
for your time and your energy.
Thank you for giving me
The Sharon Timlin 5K event.
Yep.
Oh, thank you very much, Patricia. We appreciate it. Sharon Tillman 5K event. At this time, the board will hear from Wade Marshall, event director, who will describe the virtual Sharon Tillman 5K event. Mr. Marshall, how are you,
Yes.
sir?
Yes, sir. I'm fine. How are you? Can you hear me?
Good.
All right. So it's
Yes,
Wade
sir. Take it away.
Thanks. Wade Marshall, 7 Appaloosa Circle, and the new event director for the Sharon Timlin 5K. Some of you know, Abby Rosenberg, the longtime director for the last 17 years, had made the decision to step down and to move on to other things. So I wanted to come and just provide a brief update on what the Timlin 5K is doing this year. As you know, it's been a fixture in town for 17 years. And given everything going on with COVID, last year, we made the decision to have the race go virtual. And sort of with the uncertainty of everything going on this year, we also made the decision to make the race virtual this year. It's in planning a race like this, it was sort of difficult to make the decision as which path do you go down? Do you go down the live path or do you get on the virtual path? Because things certainly are changing on a daily basis for the better. But given everything that goes into planning a race like this and the time frame, we made the decision to go virtual again this year. So again, that's really all I had. I mean, the select board has always been extremely supportive of the race. So I just wanted to take a few minutes and come on and let you know what was happening with the race and decision that we made. So with that, I don't know if anyone had any questions or I can answer.
Yeah, so Wade, thank you very much. And in public safety, I laud your decision to run it virtually. And as far as running goes, if I knew you could still call yourself a runner and do things virtually and still carbo the way I code, I may start getting into. Plus, you get the colored sneakers.
Yeah, you can. You can run it.
I'm going to virtually do some that I do.
Wait, can you hear me?
I got you, Brian. Yeah, I got you,
Yes.
Brian.
Brendan, we're losing you. But while maybe you're looking into that, Wade, so when you say virtual, is it going to be on one day and people are just going to spread out? Or are you going to do it over a month? Or
Yeah, so we really, because it's always been the third Saturday in June, and we'd like to keep that tradition upheld. But we do know that sort of life gets in the way, and especially everything going on with COVID, we will give people a 2-week run up. So anytime over, I think it's the 19th, so anytime between June 5th and June 19th, they can run the 5K and upload their times.
All right, cool. Thank you. I think it's
Yep.
better that way from crowd control and just people out and about, right?
Yep, absolutely.
And then will they still get a coveted t-shirt? My kids
They will
collect them.
still get the coveted shirt. That
Okay.
is correct. I don't know the color yet this year. We're still deciding on that, but yes, they will still get the shirt.
Well, I applaud you for doing it virtually. I think it makes complete sense until things are better. They're not better.
Yeah.
And I think it's a great way of sticking to our traditions and continuing and moving forward safely.
Thank you.
Mary Jo, anything? Okay.
I think it's been a great event for a long time, and I'm very glad to see it going virtual. I don't think we're quite ready for big numbers yet.
Agreed.
Perfect. Mr. Kamala, you
Let me try that. Mr. Kamala, do you need anything from us? For this?
I
No,
think
I'm
little Brendan's playing a game on his computer or something.
Exactly.
I'm going to go on my phone. I'm going to load this on my phone. I'm off of this thing. Hold on.
Are you good, Mr. Kamala?
Yes, we're all set.
Thanks, Wade.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Wade.
I think we're going to wait for Brendan or move on to the next agenda item.
Question is, would he wait for us? We all know the answer.
All
Well, you
right.
could go ahead and liven up the next to the town clerk and moderator, I guess, while you wait for him.
All right. I'm back. You guys there? Still there?
We are.
What are you waiting for me for? You guys should keep going.
We had that discussion.
Great. So annual town meeting, the board will be discussing a few annual town meeting topics this evening. Number one is the date and time of the annual town meeting. First, Tom Garabedian, moderator, and Connor Deegan, town clerk, will join the board now to talk about potentially changing the date of the May 3rd, 2021 annual town meeting. We understand it is recommended that we hold the annual town meeting outdoors, and since we will be outside, that it would be held on a weekend. Mr. Garabedian.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Let's see. Here I am in the darkness. I understand that there have been some discussions today that suggest that that we might be able to hold the meeting inside in the high school field house. Connor can perhaps bring us up to speed on that. We were originally targeting an outside venue, the football field, with a tent. Apparently there's some difficulties in terms of arranging for the particular size tent that we would need. So that's sparked some additional considerations and the potential consideration of the field house and possibly moving the meeting up to a Saturday in May in advance of the election. Connor, do you have some more current information on
Yes. So we, as Mr. Garabedian had said, we were looking into trying to aim for potentially an outdoor in June timeframe originally, but it was looking at like it was going to be pretty difficult with how graduation ceremonies were starting to pan out and things like that. So what we had a conversation just today with the emergency management group and specifically Deputy Chief Miller, and he was suggesting that we look at potentially instead keeping it in May and potentially trying to aim for, if possible, outdoors on the 8th as our top priority, because the current guidelines from the Department of Public Health are still going to say that we should try to get it outside if we can. But the other option that we agreed is still a possibility as a kind of a plan B as well would be what Tom had said about trying to do it in the field house and the high school, because if we do it even on a weekend still, we wouldn't be interfering with school. We'd be able to, even though May is still in the school year, we would be able to just hold it on the weekend, not interfering with school lunches, and hopefully be able to just bang it out in the one day. So we fortunately run into the same, we wouldn't have either issue with interfering with school as long as we're going to have it on the weekend anyway. So anywhere on the school campus would work. But the issue I know we're still running into is if we can find a tent. So that is why we're looking at, if we can't find a tent, then we're kind of either stuck at the mercy of the elements outside, or we're going to go with the field house. But I know there's some deadlines with how we can make the decisions on it. I don't know if Norman and Elaine have some of those handy, but that's kind of what we're working with at the moment.
Mr. Kamala, when is, or Mr. Deegan, actually, when is the election?
So also still kind of pending on that, but currently the date set in the bylaws is for May 17th. And so we're looking at potentially, we have some new legislation that just went through today that would allow us to move it. So we're going to look and see if we need to and when we can do so. But we still have time for that.
So is in your thought process, is that to move the election further out from May 17th or closer to today than May 17th?
Closer to today. That would make the meeting, the election, if it was going to move, would be further out so that we don't run the risk of anyone missing the day because they thought it was that day. For the meeting, it would still be the goal of keeping it before the town election because of the fact that if there's anything that's going to be on the ballot, like some of the questions that we're going to have regarding money, then it's going to be important to have those town meeting votes as well prior to the election itself with the ballot questions. So that's kind of where we wanted to avoid muddying the waters and confusing voters by having the meeting still occur prior to the election.
Okay. Mr. Garabedian, how do you feel about all this information that's being thrown out today?
What I would suggest, I have a little bit of a concern in early May of an outside meeting, just from the standpoint of weather. And if we have a tent, that's fine, but it can still, potentially it can still be cold. So I would suggest that if we're going to plan for something that's still in early May, that we strongly consider using the field house. As I understand it, we might be able to accommodate up to 600 people safely within the field house with doors open and so on. And that would avoid any issues with respect to weather. I would also worry a little bit about May 8th in that if we do run long, and if we don't conclude on the 8th, then we run into Mother's Day on the 9th. I don't think we have that problem if we go to the 15th and 16th.
And to that point as well, if we wanted to, we could also adjourn, not necessarily for the following day. If we had to adjourn, we could adjourn for a specified day that was announced at town meeting as well.
Yes.
So you're looking at the possibilities. If you moved it all up a week, we could do it on the 15th and the 24th for elections, right? I mean, you don't want to run into Memorial Day weekend, which would be the following weekend. So if we moved it all up a week, we would be looking at the 15th and the 24th.
Would you have to move the election if town meeting was on the 15th?
I don't believe so.
No.
So legally you wouldn't have to. I was talking with the deputy chief regarding this. We were discussing the 15th as a possibility. And the issue we ran into is just trying to schedule the logistics around the meeting if the meeting's on one day and the election's 2 days after, what kind of potential issues they could go into. If we do end up moving the election day, if that's what we want to go with, then that's less of an issue, but we definitely want to move the election out further at that point.
So the election is not being held in the same room as the town meeting, if the town meeting is to be inside.
Correct.
Yeah, so I also know I was part of a DPH call Friday, and I was also part of a DPH call today, where the DPH is very much loosening up the stringent requirements of they're still asking for social distancing and hand hygiene and mask use, but they have significantly lightened up the requirements of the distancing in lieu of vaccinations. So that what they're saying right now is, like in my industry, now you can have 4 adults sitting at a table having lunch, or two patients and 2 family members having lunch in our facility, as long as everybody in that room has proof of vaccination. And I don't know how that would go over, because I think, quite frankly, a lot of people in this town are not able to be vaccinated right now. The vaccine is not able to them. So I don't know what the DPH's stance is on the larger gatherings. And if it's at something today, it's definitely going to be something tomorrow, and definitely something more, something changed again. So it's as fluid a situation as any that I've monitored as a nurse or someone that's worked in public health. So it's hard to say, yes, we can have up to 600 in the field house on this date. We might be able to have up to 50 in the field house that day, or we might be able to have unlimited amount. So it's so hard to predict, and that's why I'm so glad that Mr. Garabedian and Mr. Deegan are the ones kind of being the ones that are predicting what we can and can't do. But I don't know. It's very hard to say what we can and can't do right now based on what the DPH and Governor Baker's rules that he lays out.
So, Mr. Chair, if I may.
Sure.
Oh, sorry. I don't mean to interrupt.
Go ahead.
So obviously we take a lot of the advice that we're pushing in off of both, public health and public safety on it as well.
Mm-hmm.
Currently, town meetings kind of fall under a different category than all the rest of the reopening procedures. We're under the same memo that we were for the town meeting that we did last year. So we're working under that same guidelines for that, and then we're just taking, which is much looser. So we're then taking that as our kind of, that's the very limit that we can go to, and we're going on the safest and best practices based on the recommendations of Sean McAuliffe in the health department, as well as the rest of the emergency management group.
Okay.
Just one data point that may help us decide some of this in the coming weeks. Governor Baker announced today that tomorrow he's going to have a plan that lays out exactly when everybody can get vaccinated in Massachusetts. So within the next week or two, I think we'll have a much better feel for how many we think will be vaccinated by the time we hit May, and then maybe that'll help us a little bit.
Well, and vaccines might be a logistical difficulty to deal with at town meeting itself if we're checking everyone for vaccine cards and having different seating based on if you have your card as well, and if you're all stamped out. I would definitely refer to Mr. McAuliffe on that one, on what he would recommend. And if he thinks that it's feasible and we can potentially get volunteers to do something like that. But it might be difficult it would slow down the check-in procedure quite a bit if we had a lot of that extra logistics working in there.
Yeah, it's also illegal. You can't require somebody. Like at our facility, we can suggest, and if people are willing to show that they are 2 weeks status post last dose of the vaccine, then we consider them 94% effective as a non-carrier of the virus. But it's illegal I suppose it's as illegal to ask them for the vaccination card as it would be illegal for you to ask me for my license when I vote. So it's information that's protected under the HIPAA Act. So nobody is required to show it. And then you run into this thing about, I don't know if you're allowed to turn someone away from town meeting. Then you run into the ADA. Yeah, so it's a logistical nightmare is what it is. And that's why I'm glad you and Tom can handle it.
Why I'm glad that we don't have to handle that part of it.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't, right now, we don't need to pick a date, right? We can say we will likely move it. But as the data pours in, then we can make a more informed decision. But it seems like right now, everything is fluid.
There's a deadline in the charter for when we have to post the warrant, though. But we have a couple more weeks, I think.
So yeah, it's the warrant deadline posting is 8 days prior, but if we move things around, I think and I'd have to check. I'd refer to council on this because some of the rules have been changing, but there have been some things that have made it so the warrant has to be posted earlier if you move things around after everything's already been announced for timing and stuff like that. I know that's the rule currently with the new election stuff, is that if you're changing the date of the initially scheduled election, then it just has to be, it changes the voter registration deadlines to be shorter. It changes the time where the warrant has to be posted to be potentially a little longer. So it's something to be conscious of as well.
So I'm looking at a motion here that's looking to move the annual town meeting currently scheduled to commence on May 3rd at 7:00 p.m. to a different date. Do you, Mr. Kamalu, and Mr. Garabedian have a consensus of what date you'd like us to make that motion to move the meeting to?
I'd say at this moment, no. I think we need to better understand whether a tent will be available and if so, when. And then have a discussion with our team to understand whether, with that knowledge, whether an indoor setting is something that the public health department would feel is acceptable.
Okay.
And at that point, we'd be in a position to make a firm recommendation.
Okay, so Mr. Kamalu, are we, or Mr. Deegan, are we within our legal time limits to table this to an agenda item on our next meeting?
Norman, would you like to start?
Yeah. Mr. Chair, I don't have the date of the next meeting in front of me. However, should we learn that an earlier meeting is necessary, we'll ask the board to schedule a meeting to accommodate that.
Simply for this?
Correct.
Okay, and I'm fine with that. Board, are you fine with that?
Yeah, and our next meeting is April 6th, so it's not too far off. So.
Okay.
And yeah, I don't think there's any issue with that. I know that the main piece from the kind of prep side of it is going to be the more lead time we have, the more we can prepare for if we need to do, be looking for a tent right now for a specific date. If we need to sign an agreement for a tent for a specific date. So that's why we're going to still want to make sure that it's probably sooner rather than later for trying to figure out that date. But we can get some more info to you so we can hopefully figure it out soon.
Okay. Let us know. So Connor and Tom, why don't you let Mr. Kamalu know if we need to reconvene as a board prior to our April 6th meeting. If not, then we will put this an agenda item on our April 6th meeting.
Okay.
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 Well, yeah, I have a few meetings tomorrow, and Tom does as well regarding this as well. So we'll kind of get some of it sorted out so we can have it by the end of the week for you folks.
Okay, that sounds great. Thanks, Connor.
Always happy to help.
So now we will move on to the annual town meeting warrant articles. The board received a draft annual town meeting warrant in the packet for this meeting. At future meetings, we will be taking positions on some of the articles. So if there are any articles we have questions on that staff, I'm sorry, So if there are any articles we have questions on that staff can answer, are there any non-financial articles we'd like to have somebody come to future meetings to discuss? Mr. Kamalu?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think you summarized our request aptly. We are simply directing the board to the draft annual town meeting warrant that was circulated in your packet with a view towards having you identify to us
I
what
see.
articles you'd like to review in much more detail at your future meeting. Tonight, we're not asking you to do anything on the warrant.
All right, great, thank you. All right, so moving on to the community satisfaction survey. Demema Mann of the National Research Center will join us to present the results of the 2020 Community Satisfaction Survey. Ms. Mann. Is Ms. Mann on?
Yes, I am.
Okay. All right.
Thanks. It just settings just changed as I got promoted to be a speaker.
So you're on.
I had sent my slides. Okay, great. I had sent my slides in earlier today. I believe here we are. Great, terrific. Wonderful. Well, thanks for having me tonight. I'm here to discuss the results of the National Community Survey, or the NCS as we refer to it, that we recently conducted for Hopkinton. The NCS is a survey that we originally designed about 20 years ago in partnership with ICMA, the International City and County Management Association. We've of course revised it and updated it over the years, but it's a survey that we've conducted for hundreds of communities across the US, and it's designed to be a broad omnibus survey to measure overall community livability. And if you've had a chance to review the reports or familiarize yourself with the data at all yet, you'll see that we tend to organize the reporting around these 10 facets of community livability that we have derived from our research over the years. Next slide, please. This is the second time we've conducted the NCS for Hopkinton. The first survey we conducted for the town was in 2013. This past survey was conducted in the late summer and early fall of 2020. It was a scientific sample of 1,700 randomly selected households within town limits. We had a very strong response rate of 35%. That's higher than average for this kind of study, which also led us to a margin of error, yielded a margin of error of plus or minus 4% around the data. Typically with this kind of study, we're trying to get to a 5% margin of error. So this was a higher level of precision due to the strong response rate in town. So that was terrific. I'm going to just try and go over some quick highlights tonight in the interest of time, but there's a lot of data in the reports to dig into, in addition to the standard survey services that we provide. There's also a standalone report for residents that were not selected to be part of the scientific sample. The survey was opened up to the rest of the community if they wanted to weigh in. So those reports, those results were kept separate, and there's a report of those. We also ran some demographic cross tabulations and broke out the results by some of the demographic questions on the survey. And in addition to the national benchmarks, which I'll get into in a second, there's some custom benchmark comparisons. So there's a lot of great data to dig into as you have time to examine and digest the reports. Next slide, please. So I touched upon the national benchmarks briefly. One of the great benefits of conducting the NCS is that we have amassed a very large benchmarking comparison database. There's about 600 communities across the US that have conducted the NCS, and we've been able to create an average rating for each item on the survey. So in addition to giving you your ratings and comparing Hopkinton's ratings from 2013 to 2020, we're also able to tell you how your ratings compare to those national averages, because some services are always going to be more highly regarded than others in these kinds of surveys, and it's a great way to help put the results into context. Next slide, please. So here's a snapshot of how Hopkinton compared or stacked up to that national benchmarking database. For each item on the survey, 86 of the question items were similar to the benchmark, 38 were higher, 14 received lower ratings. We have intentionally made it difficult to be anything other than similar to the benchmark, and this this is to help make the data as actionable as possible. So areas where you're higher than the benchmark should truly be considered areas where you're excelling, and areas where you're lower could be potential areas to direct more resources, depending on what they are and how they compare to town priorities. Areas where Hopkinton, this is unusual. We expect to see most ratings be similar to the benchmark, and they were for Hopkinton. However, the number of ratings that were higher than the benchmark are definitely a standout to us. Hopkinton excelled in many areas. A lot of them had to do with quality of life, education, the town as a place to live, neighborhoods as a place to live, town as a place to raise children, parks and recreation, and many of the ratings that were higher than the national averages had to do with safety, overall feelings of safety, police services, crime prevention, emergency preparedness. So those were some standouts there. And then as for those that were lower than the benchmark, I'm going to get into a little bit more detail on them on some upcoming slides. Next slide, please. Here's a quick snapshot of how the ratings in 2020 that were able to be compared to those from 2013 stacked up. You can see overall of the ratings that we were able to compare between the two surveys, most of them remained stable over time. 44 items were stable, 23 were trending up, which is also notable, and 12 were lower in 2020 than in 2013. Next slide, please. Now I'll just briefly go over the key findings that we as researchers saw in the data. As I noted before, there is a lot to dig into, and I know that time is limited tonight. So I'm just going to briefly go over some of these key highlights. The first was that community members noted that economic improvements, that there were several economic improvements. However, it's also a potential area of opportunity. Next slide, please. The ratings for the overall economic health of Hopkinton were very strong. About almost all rating it is excellent or good, 87%. This rating was higher than the national benchmark. Next slide, please. There were some noted changes between the 2013 survey and the 2020 survey. Ratings for economic development, the overall quality of businesses and service establishments, and those not experiencing housing cost stress increased in 2020 compared to 2013. Whereas ratings for shopping opportunities, employment opportunities, and those that had a positive economic impact were declining, and those that are declining are very similar to what we've seen for many communities that collected data in 2020 and during the COVID-19 pandemic. So those are very much likely to be related to that. Next slide, please. Some of the ratings that were lower than the benchmark, I talked about that earlier, were clustered a little bit in economy in this facet, variety of businesses and service establishments, the vibrancy of a downtown or commercial area, shopping opportunities, cost of living, and those that had a positive economic outlook on their income were lower than national averages. Again, not surprising for data collected in 2020. Next slide, please. The next key finding was that residents are very pleased with their local government, and many of those ratings have increased over time. Next slide, please. Some of the most highly rated services within the facet of governance were these that you see here on this slide. About 8 in 10 respondents or more gave excellent or good ratings to the overall customer service provided by town employees, public information services provided by the town, the overall quality of services provided by the town, and the job that the town government does at treating residents with respect. And that rating for the overall quality of customer service by town employees was higher than the national average. Next slide, please. We also saw ratings increase significantly from 2013 to 2020 for the overall customer service provided by town employees, the overall direction that the town is taking, and the job that the town government does at welcoming resident involvement. Next slide, please. The next key finding was that while there were ratings within mobility that were lower than the benchmark, specifically those related to public transportation, however, we did see a lot of improvements within this facet as well. Next slide, please. This was one of the other facets of livability where we saw, a small cluster of ratings lower than the benchmark. Of course, Hopkinton had more ratings that were higher than the benchmark than lower, but in looking through the data, this was a standout to us that the overall quality of the transportation system, ease of travel by bicycle, bus or transit services, and ease of travel by public transportation were lower than national averages. Next slide, please. However, we did see a number of ratings within the facet of mobility increasing in 2020 compared to 2013. The ratings that increased the most, Hopkinton residents gave higher ratings to street lighting, traffic flow on major streets, and ease of travel by car in Hopkinton. Those had the biggest jumps, but overall, a third of the ratings that increased in Hopkinton in 2020 were clustered within the facet of mobility, and they also there were also street cleaning, snow removal, sidewalk maintenance, traffic signal timing, and ease of walking were all higher in 2020 than in 2013. Next slide, please. And just to wrap this up, one of the another key benefits of doing the NCS, in addition to getting your trends over time and the benchmark comparisons, is that there is space to add some questions completely specific to Hopkinton. These questions were developed in conjunction with town staff. Next slide, please. The first question asked respondents to rate how important, if at all, they thought it was for the town to address several different items in the next 5 years. And these questions were asked, these items were asked to be rated on a scale of essential, very important, somewhat important, or not at all important. And what you see here are the top three. This is the percent essential or very important. So far and away, it was clear that school facility expansion, 77% of residents in Hopkinton said that was an essential or very important focus area for the town. That definitely came out as number one, followed by renovating the center school for reuse for community meeting space, town offices, etc. And about 42% saying expanding public bus service to nearby train stations should be a top focus area. Next slide, please. We then asked residents to select a statement that best represented their opinion about the current level of taxes and services in the town. By far, the most residents selected the option that said they were satisfied with the current level of taxes and services, 45% selecting that. About a third saying that they felt that they paid too much for the services they receive. And then fewer than 1 in 10 saying they were willing to accept service reductions if it meant lower taxes, that they were willing to pay more taxes to get more services, and about 5% saying that their opinion was different from these options that you see listed here. Next slide, please. The next custom question had to do with managing a potential revenue deficit due to COVID-19. It told respondents that the town was anticipating reductions in local and state revenues due to the pandemic, and which of the following best describes how Hopkinton should manage projected revenue deficits. And you can see that a majority said that Hopkinton should maintain current tax levels and reduce service delivery and infrastructure spending. Followed by about 1/4 saying that the town should use a combination of tax increases and reduced service delivery and infrastructure spending to address the deficits. Followed by just 12% saying that the town should increase taxes in order to maintain current service delivery, and 4% saying that the town should increase taxes in order to increase current service delivery and infrastructure spending. Next slide, please. And the final question asked about some potential priorities. It read, how much of a priority, if at all, should it be for the town to focus on each of the following? What you see here are the percent that said high or moderate priority. The scale was high priority, moderate priority, low priority, or not a priority. You can see that a majority, at least 50% or more, rated each of these items as a high or moderate priority for the town. And these had to do mainly with equity and inclusion. So there was definitely support for that. And next slide, please. So just to wrap up, it's clear that community members, noted economic improvements, but it's also a potential area of opportunity, of course, with what we're seeing with the COVID-19 pandemic and all of the challenges that is presenting to local governments everywhere. That's not a surprise. Residents are definitely very pleased with the local government in Hopkinton. Some of those ratings were a standout, as were those increases over time. Mobility ratings, while many of them are lower than the benchmark, we did see many improvements in that area. Also, just in the interest of time, I'm just trying to go through this very quickly, but I just wanted to also highlight that the quality of life ratings and safety ratings are very high in Hopkinton. And it's very clear to us as researchers that it remains a very positive place to live. Those high ratings have remained stable over time. Now I'm happy to answer any questions anybody may have.
So thank you very much, Demema, or Demema. Is it Demema or Demema?
Mema.
Demema. Okay, sorry.
No, no problem.
That was quite a comprehensive survey, and I've gotten a few texts from the people out here that are listening that said that you are one of the few people that speak faster than I do. So well done. I'm glad to hand you the crown.
I am a Massachusetts native.
All right. Well, I didn't.
Think it helps.
I would have pegged you for New Hampshire, lack of swear. So thank you very much. Board members, I will open it up to you for any questions. Mr. Nasrullah.
Yeah, I had a quick question. When we're comparing the national average, are we comparing Hopkinton as compared to all other towns of similar sizes, or just all other towns?
So for that's a great question. For the national benchmark, it is compared to all of the communities in our database. So much larger cities and counties and from all regions across the US. It's about over 600 communities. And so that's what I focused on in the presentation. But in the technical appendices report, there is a custom subset of benchmark comparisons, and we worked with town staff to determine what that would be. And that's a much smaller subset of communities. It's other communities in New England, and also some that have similar population ranges and annual household income levels.
Okay, thanks. It seems like if we're comparing Hopkinton to, someplace in Nebraska or Montana where there's far fewer people, it's not really an apples to apples comparison,
It's true, you're never going to find your, exact twin. However, all local governments are in the same business of providing services to their residents. And so we do see some, kind of national patterns. I will say that, those jurisdictions in the national database even tend to be more high performing data driven organizations because they're doing surveys like this in the first place. So you're being compared to a pretty high level of community. And then with that subset, those custom benchmark comparisons that we also have in the reporting for you, I'd say it's an even more challenging subset. However, Hopkinton still performed very well with those communities.
Excellent, thank you.
To her.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Very interesting. I've sat on the board for a number of years, and you get a gut feel for what the community is all about. A lot of those numbers confirmed that. The data was there that drove kind of my thinking over the years. I would congratulate Mr. Kamalo and his team for providing excellent service to the taxpayers of Hopkinton and treating them with respect. I think that was a great finding in the report, and certainly appreciate that given some of the other stuff that goes on in our world these days. So it's really nice to see that. I'm not surprised to see that school facilities, schools in general, are very, very high on the minds of the participants in the survey. The schools drive our local economy. And I'm not surprised to see that some of the other questions about the economy and the lack of shopping and the lack of this and the lack of that, that's all kind of designed by the town too. So while we want to have those things, nobody wants them, in the area too close. So that it doesn't surprise me that those are some of the areas where we're behind. But I think in general, we always have to remember that our schools do drive our economy, and that creates the value of the community, which creates the tax base, which creates the revenue to have excellent public safety and excellent DPW facilities and all the other things that we can do in town because of it. And we just got to keep our eye on that prize. But very interesting findings, and certainly appreciate you spending time with us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Herr. Ms. Lafreniere.
You're muted, Mary Jo.
Ms. Ritterbush.
Oh, Mary Jo's all set.
I'm sorry. This afternoon, I noticed in the report, it talked about bus transportation and mobility ratings and that sort of thing were low. And I was talking to Ed Carr this afternoon, as we normally Elaine, I believe, and he made an announcement to me that we are getting the ride in Hopkinton, which should help a lot there, and particularly with our senior citizens. And I welcome that very much. And just that's changing. So good thing.
That's great.
Miss Ritterbush.
Yeah, I want to say I really appreciate the survey. And it was fascinating to read, and I haven't read the whole thing yet. But I love the demographic comparisons. You could see if people who lived in town longer or have moved here more recently, if they felt differently about different issues. You could see if men and women felt differently about different issues. And anyway, it's really fascinating, and I think it's really good that we did this work. So when it's all set, I think what's in our agenda was a draft, but when it's all final, I think we should get that posted on the website for the public to take a look at too. And then we can use it to guide our process next year for budget.
Yeah, and thank you. So the only comment I have is I was wondering, and I haven't read the whole report, but I was similar to Mr. Nasrullah. I was wondering if you were comparing us to all communities in this country or a select few, and like if you were comparing us to Lima, Ohio, or Marion, Ohio versus Inglewood, California, those are two massively different demographics. But you answered the question by Mr. Nasrullah. So thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Herr, for that. So that being said, Mr. Kamalu, is there anything else we need to do right here?
Well, I think our mobility issues mean we need a monitor.
Yes, we are not asking for any specific action by the board. However, I want to take this opportunity to thank the community for its support in making this survey possible. I also want to thank the NRC for its continued partnership with the town. And we are hoping that we will be able to do these kinds of surveys, that the community is able to do these surveys perhaps every 5 years, so that we can identify clear trends and use that information to inform our decisions going forward.
Good. So, Ms. Mann, thank you very much for everything, and we will look at this again further next time we look at it. So, moving on to the FY 2022 comprehensive budget. Tonight, the board will consider adopting the town manager's proposed budget and capital items for the FY 22 budget and submit them to the appropriations committee. Mr. Kamalu. Mr. Kamalu, how much time did you give yourself on the agenda for this item?
For the town manager, for the comprehensive budget?
Yes.
It's 30 minutes.
30 minutes. That was a little bit generous on your side. Let's see if we can't get this done a little quicker than that. Go ahead. Time's burning.
I may surprise you, Mr. Chair, through the chair. Today, I have a very brief update on the overall budget situation. As you may know, while the firm and definitive facts remain much as they were when I provided the last update, February 2nd, I do have some good news coming specifically from the enactment of the $1.9 trillion COVID-19 federal relief program, namely the American Rescue Plan. That plan contains approximately $350 billion for state and local governments. My initial information is that Hopkinton should receive at least $1.82 million in new restricted local aid. This funding, we've been told, is expected to be available for at least 2 fiscal years, i.e. FY22 and FY23. The FY22 budget update in your meeting packet does not reflect any of the funds coming from this program because the rules for use of the funding have not yet been shared with states and towns. I believe it is likely that the rules for use of the funding will allow the town to at least cover, remember that $200,000 for PPE? To cover that $200,000 in expenses that are currently budgeted in FY22 for personal protective equipment. We will confirm that when the rules are published. Likewise, the finance team and I will carefully review the rules for the state level and federal level to determine which additional expenses in FY22 can be covered with this funding. And I will provide an updated budget recommendation to you in the Appropriations Committee at that time. The other good news is that the American Rescue Plan provides an additional $130 billion in new, more flexible, multi-year funding to support our cherished public schools nationwide over the next 3.5 years, with approximately $1.8 billion allocated for Massachusetts. That number is nearly 10 times as much as was provided under the CARES Act. Remember, under the CARES Act, Hopkinton Public Schools received $871,000. So we are anticipating that this number will be much higher than the $871,000. The initial guidance, to my relief, that I've reviewed suggests that mental health services for students will be a qualified expense. That may include funding that could be used for a social and emotional health director or coordinator, a position that has been discussed for the high school and other similar services, including services that could be provided by the Hopkinton Youth and Family Services Department. The most important next step in the town's budget process will be to get the firm, definitive rules on the use of the American Rescue Plan funding from our state and federal partners, so that staff can evaluate the best recommended uses of this important funding. So again, in summary, the information that is included in your packet is similar to the update that I gave back on February 2nd. However, I felt we needed to put out to you the preliminary assessment that we have made regarding how the American Rescue Plan funding might impact the budget process going forward. Your task tonight, again, is to consider a motion that will move the budget over to the Appropriations Committee.
Is that it, Mr. Kamalo?
That's it for me now, unless the board has any questions.
Okay, great. Mr. Nasrullah.
So if we're voting on moving the proposed budget, when we don't know what the final impact of the federal programs are, is that something that can be adjusted as we go, even though we vote on it now?
Yes, that's a very good question, Mr. Nasrallah. We are very experienced here in Hopkinton in this budget cycle, iterative budget cycle, where the budget can move to the Appropriations Committee, and at the same time, we're still able to be flexible enough, nimble enough to receive new information, feed it both to the Appropriations Committee and the Select Board. And the Select Board, at any point in time before town meeting, can make adjustments to the budget.
Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Herr.
So what is our current tax impact net of new growth scheduled today?
The budgets we presented, you may recall, Mr. Hare, there's a budget that has a 2.5% tax impact, and there's another budget with a 1% tax impact. And my sense has been that, based on the questions and the comments we have received from the board, that it's most likely that tonight the board may be recommending the budget that has a 2.5% tax impact. Again, that number may change based on how we factor in the funding coming from the American Rescue Plan.
And to what extent then would stabilization be used coming in? If if we have more cash coming in, because we've got stabilization there right now, can we back out? Will we be backing out of stabilization and saving more of that for another year? Or what's the plan?
Another good question, Mr. Hay. Discussions at staff level are indicating that as more resources become available, we will be shifting from withdrawing funds from both stabilization funds, the school stabilization fund, as well as the general stabilization fund. You may recall that when we started these discussions, the number was up there, and I think it's now down to around 300 and something thousand. And with the 200,000 that we're taking out from the American Rescue Plan funding to fund the PPE, that number goes down further. So yes, the idea is as more funding sources become available, we will be moving and shifting away from withdrawing from the reserves.
And those reserves will be done in an equitable manner between the two funds, correct?
That has been
proportional to what they're being used now at this 2.5 number.
You're correct, yes.
Okay, that's fair.
That's good.
Thank you.
Ms. Lafreniere.
I haven't got any questions as we go along. I think this is just a great opportunity that we're getting this money from the feds.
Ms. Ritterbusch.
Yeah, I don't think I have any other questions other than what other people have already asked. I think we should go ahead with the 2.5%, and that would be great if we get more money from the government and we can reduce the amount we have to take out of stabilization.
Great. So I will request a motion to move forward the town manager's March 16, 2021 memorandum fiscal year 2022 comprehensive budget to the appropriation committee for the review of the 2.5% tax impact version of the recommendation and for preparation of a recommendation to the annual town meeting.
Second.
Any further
Chair.
discussion?
Yeah, why do we have for the recommendation to the annual town meeting in this motion? We don't need to do that tonight because we're not quite ready to make that, are we?
Mr. Chair, if I may clarify, that phrasing does not relate to the board's action tonight. It simply says the appropriations committee's review process will be designed towards developing a recommendation for town meeting.
But not recommend, when we vote tonight, this 2.5 to go to appropriations, that's not also saying we're recommending it go to town meeting. That's kind of what I thought I heard.
Yeah, and that's not what the motion says, Brian.
Okay.
Yeah.
Would you like me to reread it or are you good with that, Mr. Herr?
Would you reread it, please?
Oh, yes, I'd love to. I move to forward the town manager's March 16, 2021 memorandum fiscal year 2022 comprehensive budget to the appropriations committee for review of the 2.5% tax impact version of the recommendation and for preparation of a recommendation to the annual town meeting.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
So it was so moved and seconded. No more discussion. Mr. Nasrullah, how do you vote?
Nasrullah, yes.
Mr. Herr?
Or yes.
Ms. Lafreniere?
Lafreniere, yes.
Ms. Ritterbusch?
Ritterbusch, yes.
Headstone, yes. Great. Thank you for that, Mr. Kamalu. We will segue right on to your town manager report.
If I may indulge, Mr. Chair, I still wanted to check time. I thought.
That's great. Once in 5 years, you've been under budget.
Yeah, 1 more minute left.
Exactly. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, everybody. Main Street Corridor Project, as I indicated in my update to the board, the survey crews continue to work throughout the project area. The project website is up and running. We have already issued a construction advisory to date. And also we are seeing the contractor Amorello beginning its work on Main Street. They've also, I think, set up landing areas on Marathon Way. We are expecting DPW to issue the road opening permit soon. I also want to mention that Eversource Gas continues their work. And in addition, there has been some confusion regarding the need for landing areas for the construction of the Main Street Corridor project. I want to assure town residents that the town's primary goal is, and it continues to be, to deliver this project in the most efficient and least disruptive manner possible. We all understand that for the next 24 months, Main Street will be torn up. Construction equipment will be moving up and down Main Street and the side streets adjoining Main Street. Most of the town residents, if not all residents, will be impacted by this project. Some a little more than others. For one, I've heard Mr. Hare reference a large traffic alert sign in front of his house. He's assured me that he's tolerating it as best as he can. And my message to the community is that we all need to support the project as best as we can to get it done as soon as possible. On its part, the town will take all necessary steps to minimize the impacts of the construction activities on your neighborhoods. And again, I do sympathize, I do hear the concerns that have been raised with regard to how disruptive this project is going to be. And as we have said in the past, and as I continue to say now, yes, you're correct. It is going to be a very different 24 months in Hopkinton on Main Street.
Mr. Kamala, can I just jump in and throw a comment on that? You know, some of the comments that we've gotten and emails that we've gotten, and maybe not to everybody on the board, maybe they're text messages or emails directed to me. You know, to the people in the town that aren't aware, 4 of the 5 board members live within a quarter mile of where this Main Street Corridor project is going. So it's not like we're living in the outskirts and not having to deal with the traffic or the noise or the dust or the dirt. 4 of the 5 of us live within a quarter mile of the project, and will be adversely affected every single day of this. And the 5th board member that does not live in the center of town has a business whose this is going right by his or her business. So, you know, it's not like we're removed from this and we're not going to be adversely affected. We're going to be as adversely, if not more, affected than a good portion of the people in town. And we all, in every single motion that's come before us with the present board, it was a 5-0 vote that we all supported everything. So we are doing what's right for the town, and there will be a few residents, and 4 of the 5 of us will be adversely affected every single day on this. And yet we still see that it's for the best for the town moving forward. Now, keep going, or you're going to be late.
All hands meeting. Wanted to report to the community that over 80 staff and board members attended the meeting. We are now compiling the responses that we have received from the Tech Away survey. We will share the results of the survey as soon as the survey closes. And then last but not least, I am delighted to share, and in fact, I'll let Elaine also jump in, the project that has been brought to our attention to be conducted and performed by one of our marvelous scouts. And with the chair's permission, I would let Elaine describe the project.
You have the chair's permission.
Thank you. Pratt Farm is one of the newer open spaces the town has, and it's seen a lot of interest and use over the last few years, especially during the pandemic. And so an Eagle Scout has volunteered to build and install a kiosk with information at the location about the site. Hopefully it can contain some historical information as well as other areas of other topics of interest for the public. So that's a great project and it'll be a big benefit for the town.
That is very, very awesome. Thank you very much to the Eagle Scout that's going to take over that kiosk project. And if there's anything that they need, please reach out to the town hall and we can reach out to the appropriate people to help them out. Mr. Kamala.
I'm all set, Mr. Chair.
You are wonderful. Liaison reports and board invitees. Board members, any liaison reports? Mr. Nasrullah?
Just one. Last week, we had the pleasure of attending a ribbon cutting ceremony at the reopening of the Spoon. So myself and some of the other board members were there, and it was a great event. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you to everybody that made it there. I could not make it. I had a previous engagement at work. So I know that Amy, Irfan, and Mary Jo made it. So thank you guys very much. Mr. Herr.
Nothing tonight, thank you.
Ms. Lafreniere.
Well, just in my discussions with Ed Carr from Metro West Regional Transit Authority, that we are getting the ride. I'm just delighted about that for the seniors and for anybody in town who uses the ride. It's a good thing. That's all.
Good. Thank you. Ms. Ritterbusch.
Yep. So on that similar business note, the Historic District Commission recently approved a sign for a new business going into 76 Main Street, so that people can look forward to Pine Nutrition coming in there. And then also the Freedom Team, in conjunction with Youth and Family Services, is doing another active bystander upstander training this Saturday, March 20th at 9 a.m. And that is for anyone either working at Town Hall or serving on a board and committee. And I went last time, Mr. Kamalo went, Mr. Chief Bennett, and if anyone's available, I encourage you to attend 9 a.m. on Zoom on Saturday, and I can send the link.
Please do.
Great. And then for me, I went to an open space meeting a week or so ago and sat through that. So that seems to be going well with a lot of activity on that board. Future board agenda items. Mr. Nasrullah.
Nothing today.
Mr. Herr.
All set, thanks.
Ms. Lafreniere.
All set.
Ms. Ritterbusch.
I'm all set.
Okay, Mr. Nasrullah, if you would, please.
Chair, I move to adjourn the meeting.
Second.
Oh, there we go. Any further discussion? Hearing none. Mr. Nasrullah, how do you vote?
Ms. Willie, yes.
Mr. Herr.
Herr, yes.
Ms. Lafreniere.
Yes, and happy St. Patrick's Day tomorrow.
Yes, I started early. I went to an Irish restaurant today on my way home from work, McDonald's. Ms. Ritterbusch.
Ritterbusch, yes.
Ted Stone, yes. All right, guys. Happy Thanksgiving. See you later.
All right. Good evening, everyone.
Happy St. Patrick's.